So there's been a lot of talk around the relationship between Nintendo and Nvidia. Nvidia talks about how their Tegra chips are selling really, really well now. It's a great revenue stream for them because of the Switch, whereas before they mostly were scratching their head trying to figure out a place to put these chips where they could bring in this kind of revenue. So naturally, a lot of us are wondering what's next for this long-term partnership between Nvidia and Nintendo. Many of us think that there will be some sort of refresh of the hardware, and how much of a refresh, that's the big question now. Will it be a smaller one? Will they really push things and create their own PlayStation 4 Pro or Xbox One X version of the current Switch? Hard to say, but most of us understand that in like 2 or 3 years, there probably will be a next generation Switch. And that's going to be the interesting part, because right now there are some things happening with Nvidia that could spill over into that next generation Switch hardware that would allow Nintendo to create a more powerful Switch without having to use very expensive hardware. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure that like button helps out a ton. And if you're new here to the Small Wave Plus channel, make sure you subscribe down below. So I want to go over here to the Nvidia developer page because they put out a press release that flew under the radar a little bit, but recently people have been talking about this a lot, mostly because they've been able to try this one out in Unreal Engine 4. So we've talked a bit about DLSS. That's the deep learning super sampling that they have currently in 2.0, and there's been talks about their next version of it as well as it continues to improve. But we can go over here to the developer page where they say NVIDIA DLSS plugin and Reflex now available for Unreal Engine. Reflex is something I'm not going to focus on as much here. I'm specifically going to really talk about DLSS because that's the thing that I think will be the biggest jump for what could be a next generation Switch, or possibly the revision. Again, though, I think with what you would need to pull this off, which we assume would be tensor cores and probably a new chip overall, I'm still thinking DLSS for next generation 2 or 3 years from now. Who knows, with maybe DLSS 3.0 or even like 4.0. They say leveling up your games with the cutting edge technologies found in the biggest blockbusters just got a lot simpler. As of today, Unreal Engine 4 developers can now access DLSS as a plugin for Unreal Engine 4.26. Additionally, NVIDIA Reflex is now available as a feature in Unreal Engine. And if we scroll down here, they do show off a few different things, specifically the performance jump without really losing any like actual quality to the image. You could still spot it somewhat, but it's not how it was before, where if you were using a video card that just wasn't up to the task, you would be like, you know what, I guess I'm gonna have to drop from 4K down to 1080p, or back in the day, you drop from 1080p down to like 768 or something, whatever you could get out of your monitor. But the idea is you would sacrifice the image quality down to essentially a blurrier image for a better frame rate. But the biggest thing about deep learning super sampling is it will scale up the image using AI in order to achieve an image that looks very much the same, but as you can see here, doing things like going from 87 frames per second up to 178 frames per second in 4K. They explain that a bit more here. DLSS is a deep learning super resolution network that boosts frame rates by rendering fewer pixels and then using AI to construct sharp, higher resolution images. Dedicated computational units on NVIDIA RTX GPUs called tensor cores accelerate the AI calculations, allowing the algorithm to run in real time. DLSS pairs perfectly with computationally intensive rendering algorithms such as real-time ray tracing. So going into the next generation Switch, I know we're like 2 or 3 years off, which means we're probably a solid 1.5 to 2 years from hearing any real rumblings about a next generation Switch, although we have heard about different things with maybe screen technology. That's something else they could pursue, because if they do leverage DLSS from this long-term agreement with NVIDIA that we feel like, according to NVIDIA, they've mentioned before, is like 15 or 20 years, DLSS is probably the next logical step for Nintendo, because the way Nintendo likes to work with their hardware is they want to make money very quickly. Generally, day one, they tried to. It didn't work with the Wii U. For what I remember, they lost money on the Wii U like right away. But the Switch, they were actually making a little bit of money from it, and now I'm sure they've been making steadily more and more money as the years have gone on and the hardware has gotten a bit older. So now if DLSS comes into play as a native part of Unreal Engine 4 through a plugin, and according to some of the news here, NVIDIA won't have to go through and approve basically any of the games that want to use it now because it's just part of Unreal Engine 4 and it's much easier to implement. You could see Nintendo going into their next generation Switch using cheaper hardware, we'll say, but leveraging some of the software and the things like DLSS to put out, we'll say, a 720p or a 1080p image, and then have that intelligently upscale to 4K. And you could see them put out games that are similar in quality to a PS5 or an Xbox Series X, even with like half the hardware, which means, yes, they could maintain the hybrid nature of the Switch, something that's made it so popular, but also not have to have the sacrifices that they have now when it comes to the way some of these games look. Really, the more DLSS is adopted in game development, the better for Nintendo and Nvidia, obviously, going forward here. So now it's natively part of Unreal Engine 4, and we'll see if engines like Unity maybe add it in. That would be big because that's another one that is used quite a bit on the Switch now. But Unreal Engine and Unity, if both of those have it, and maybe you see other developers use it for some of their in-house engines, it could get very, very interesting going forward for the Switch and what Nintendo has planned in the next couple of years for their next-gen hardware. But let me know what you guys think about this one down below, especially if you're someone who's been playing around with Unreal Engine 4 and you saw this plugin added. Did you try it out, and did it make a big difference for some of your projects that you're making? Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.